The first call with a recruiter seems chill. There's no camera, no presentation, no panel. But that's where most people mess up, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous. It's all about vibes, and it's hard to get the vibes right when all you have is a phone call. I don't sugarcoat things like, yes, congrats for making it to this stage, but you don't want to take this lightly because this round is literally make it or break it. My name is Nabil, and during my tech recruiting journey, I've done really poorly and really amazingly at these calls. And I've also learned a lot from research and working with other people doing these calls. I've read the hundreds of HR articles, spoken to the recruiters, done all that work for you. And in this video, I don't want to just share with you the tips and things I've learned. We will absolutely do that. But I also want you to become excited about these kinds of calls. If you have one of these recruiter calls coming up, or if you're just stressed that you'll get a call that'll be like, do you have a few minutes to chat? If you're dreading this, by the end of this video, you won't just be prepared, you'll be counting down the days until your next recruiter screening. Okay, so we're gonna start with a few simple things that happen before the call because I wanna make this video have some sense and some logical order. So before the call, one thing I want you to realize, just to get your nerves down, is to view this as a two-way conversation. Specifically, I want you to realize that this isn't just about the recruiter liking you. It's also about you deciding if you want this role or if you want this opportunity. And listen, I know that sometimes you might really want this either because you don't have many other options or because the other options just aren't as great. But the reality is, based on just a job description, you have limited information to work with. And whatever you think is this dream job or how amazing it is will only be validated once you get into this call and further rounds in the process. So please don't come in with this pressure on yourself to prove yourself to some recruiter. And the second part is that the recruiter wants you to succeed, and the recruiter is selling themselves and the role in the company just as much as you are selling yourself to them. We just said it's a two-way conversation where you are trying to learn as much about the role as they are trying to learn about you. Well, in the same way, the recruiter only takes time out of their busy day to speak to you if they know or think or assume that you're worth it. You stood out amongst many, many people. And so I want you to, before we get into anything, have the confidence and the mindset that this is a two-way conversation where you are doing as much interviewing as the recruiter is and where you are set up for success because the recruiter wants you to succeed. And so the third and last thing I'll mention for the before the call part is that you want to do whatever mental reset works for you before the call. So for some people, it's like taking a walk. For me, I just like to play a certain song before these kinds of interviews. So whatever works for you to just reset your nerves. Okay, now let's get into content. Please feel free to take some notes so that you have some ideas on how to answer, but also during your preparation. The first thing I want to talk about is whether or not you should be technical in the content you share and the way you answer questions during these interviews. Now, I get this question a lot from software engineering people, but the reality is every role can be considered technical in some way. So this point that I'm going to talk about now is important for any type of industry. And this is how I want you to think of this. Do not assume the recruiter is a genius in the sector you're applying to, nor someone who's completely clueless. This recruiter that you're working with, if they're qualified to be doing the recruiting, they will know what you're talking about. So you should not be afraid of getting technical with a recruiter during a first round interview call. Now, there is a balance to be had. For example, you're not going to go too deep into a technical issue. However, you should be prepared and you absolutely should be comfortable speaking to certain technical things that would be part of your role. Even if you don't get a question that specifically asks you something technical, you should be absolutely bringing up some technical aspects of your experience, of how you would approach things, because that's something, even if the recruiter doesn't get, the recruiter will take notes about to then surface to the decision maker. Okay, now let's get into the meat of things around the preparation. The good news is it's probably much easier than you thought. You already did a lot of work to get to where you are. You tailored your CV if you got this far usually. You wrote a cover letter if you got this far usually, and you researched the company. So this is all work that we're going to leverage again. The first thing I want you to prepare is your basic questions. So why do you want to work at this company? Why this role specifically? Why you are a great fit for this role? You also have typical situational questions that you want to prepare for. So how do you handle stress? How do you collaborate? What are your different styles for handling disagreements? How do you prioritize things? What are your best time management skills? These are questions that come up often in all types of roles. And it's really just about having some solid content that's authentic and just presenting it well. If you just time manage with a calendar, that's all you say. Do not come up with a fake notebook or anything like that. Okay, next, you want to prepare for role-specific questions. I don't want you to prepare for hundreds of these questions. The reason is after about 10, there's going to be a lot of overlap with whatever other question you can think of. And usually during these calls, you're going to have 5 or 6 of these role specific questions, and that's it. And so if you prepared these 10 and they cover diverse areas and they're not too similar, well, the 5 or 6 you're going to get are just going to be very similar to those 10 you prepared. And this is where I get to something very important. You don't want to be scripting. And we'll get to why later in this video, but right from the preparation, I don't want you to be writing full sentences. When you're preparing the answer to a question, like how do you handle time management, the best way to prepare and to then use your notes later on is bullet points. You want to have a list of 3 key things you want to bring up and write them down and just practice explaining them. No one is great at reading out a script without sounding robotic. And bullet points, the beauty about them is that you'll be able to tailor your messaging to whatever you read the room as. For example, if the recruiter bites on one of those 3 messages more than the others, you're not going to jumble your papers and have 6 papers in front of you. You're going to be able to focus on that bullet that's more interesting to the recruiter more than the 2 others because you're flexible. And so let me just give you a few examples of what types of questions you can expect here. For some roles, you'll be asked about how you handle discovery to learn about requirements for a project or for a customer project if it's customer facing. For some roles, you might be asked about your design philosophy or your engineering philosophy or how you approach problems. You might be asked about where you get inspiration. How do you keep up with trends in the area, whether it's about having clean code or social media posts that are on brand or on trend. You can also be asked about which tools you use. So really brainstorm and do your research about what questions you might be asked and then prepare those bullets for them. Beyond ChatGPT, what you can do is go to Glassdoor and try to see if people who have done these interviews before with this actual company have shared what they've been asked before. And that way, at least you have some confidence that the questions you're preparing for are relevant. Next, for content, what I want you to do also is to have your CV in mind, or at least a copy of your CV. So what I'm imagining for you is during this call, you'll have your notes with the prepared questions as bullet points on one side, you'll have your CV on one side and your cover letter on the other. And the reason I want you to have your CV and your cover letter is, especially if you've done a lot of tailoring to different roles, you want to stay consistent, okay? You don't want to have something written on your CV and then something contradictory that you're saying. Like normally you shouldn't. If you were honest and did this well, you shouldn't. But there are certain ways to phrase things that you want to be consistent about. For example, if the recruiter, and this is very common and it can happen often, asks you to walk them through your CV, well, you want to do it in the order that things were presented on your paper CV when you applied, because that's what the recruiter has on their end. So just to keep things logical. The cover letter is also useful because you can bring up certain points that you knew were your strengths when you researched it during the interview. And you can even have your cover letter while you prepare answers to questions for the bullet points part we just discussed. Now, the last thing I will say around preparation is that you want to prepare questions to ask the recruiter. When you are at the end of that call and the recruiter is like, do you have any questions for me? And you have just 2 minutes left, it might be tempting to say, oh no, I'm all good, thank you. Don't. At best, this shows that you are not super excited, and at worst, it shows that you're uninterested in the role. And it's unfortunately just the reality of how humans work. We just assume that someone not having questions for us is not necessarily a good thing. So regardless, you want to have your 3-4 questions prepared just in case. And here's my tip. You don't want to have questions that are easy to find on Google or on the company website. You want to take it a step above, but you don't want to ask super specific questions for 2 reasons. 1, you're probably not going to get a great answer from the recruiter. And 2, you might stump the recruiter, which is not a good thing. You want the recruiter to feel good about that interaction afterwards. And if the recruiter remembers that you've made them feel stuck or like they didn't have an answer for you, that's not great, okay? So when you prepare those questions that you're going to ask the recruiter, try to find a balance between this isn't on the website and this isn't something that I can find easily, but it isn't something the recruiter will have trouble answering because it's super crazy. Okay, let's get into form now. So we've prepared, it is the day of or around the day of. Here's what we need to keep in mind about how we present ourselves during this call. Okay, first I'd like to talk about filler words, the ums, the likes, the you knows, whatever it is. What I recommend you do here to avoid them, because it's very important, because the recruiter only gets your voice this time. There is no camera or good vibes that are coming in any other way. You want to record yourself answering fake questions with your bullet point notes, for example, and see after, when you're playing back that recording, how many times you say certain filler words. If you say a filler word like like, or you know, more than 3 times-ish, that's when you know you got to work to actively suppress it. And so what I want you to do is, when you're listening to it again, if you say it more than 3 times, you write it down, and then you just keep in mind those things that you are prone to saying a lot and try to avoid saying them. And this gets me to silences. Okay, silences are a great way to not only avoid filler words, but sound better. Let me tell you why. You want to be comfortable with silence when you're doing these kinds of interviews, and honestly in life in general if you want to present yourself well, but specifically for interviews. And I'll tell you why. First, silences give you time to think. And so it's a great way, as opposed to filler words, to fill time. And second, it shows that you're thinking. Okay? A filler word like and like doesn't necessarily portray, oh, I'm confidently thinking about what you asked me. No. If you ask me about something, I'm like, not a great impression. But if you ask me about something and I take a minute to pause, just like a few seconds, that shows you that I value your question sort of unconsciously and that I thought it through. And so that the answer I'm giving isn't scripted and is honest. Okay, next you want to read the imaginary room. And what I mean by this is there's no room, but there's a lot of cues we can get from audio. And so when you're on the phone with a recruiter, if they're bubbly and they start out asking about your weekend, match that energy. Now, of course, you want to be appropriate and you know how to be human and professional or else you wouldn't have gotten to this stage. So I'm not going to give you the basics. But if the recruiter is just asking question after question after question, and it's clear that they're reading it from something, you want to just answer well and pause and move on to the next one and answer well and let them do their job. But if a recruiter is more conversational, which happens also, and I've had more experiences like this, you want to be conversational as well. You can do a little back and forth. And I will say this, don't read a script. Like we said, you have one sheet maybe with your bullet points. And if you miss a bullet point or something, you move on. It is much better to get 80% of your message across in a confident, natural way than to get 100% of it across in a robotic, awkward way. So don't feel bad if you missed a point or two. And lastly, smile. It comes through, okay? They can't see you, but it comes through. I know it's been researched and studied. Smiling changes the way our voices sound. Standing up, being in a comfortable position changes the way our voices sound. So have some water next to you, be comfortable. That makes a difference, even in the way you sound. Okay, now I want to give you a note about logistics questions because those are things that are harder to prepare and they can sometimes be tricky to answer in a way that keeps you in the running. So for these, you want to be easygoing without compromising on things that are important to you. Let me explain. You are at a stage in the process where they have just enough interest in you that you are worth a conversation with a recruiter, but that's it. You don't have leverage yet. The team doesn't even know you. So you're at this stage, just like honestly an early friendship or an early relationship. You don't know much about the other party. And so you don't want to be out here creating obstacles. If the recruiter is saying, we're thinking about 4 days in the office, and you know in your mind that you want 2 days in the office, this is not the time to bring it up. Let's get to a point where the team really likes you and you really like the team to have those discussions. Let's not create those barriers this early on because that can literally remove you from the running compared to someone who didn't bring those things up. Now, that doesn't mean you don't make clear what is a deal breaker for you. If it's in a city you're not ready to move in and they actually want you to move there, you want to make that clear because that would be a waste of time for you and for them. Okay, I will end with a scatter plot of tips that I have in no particular order, but that are just as important, so you don't want to miss these. First, ask for next steps at the end of the call. Usually a recruiter that's nice and interested will share with you what the next steps are. But if you're not given this information, you should be comfortable asking, well, what are the next steps? And next, you want to thank the recruiter. Just thank you for your time. Makes a big difference. One recent recruiter I worked with was amazing. And I told her this on the call. I really appreciate how transparent you've been, how insightful the questions you asked me were, and how helpful you are. Tell her this. It won't hurt. It can only help. Because if it's genuine and it's a good compliment, you're making her day, and that can only make her feel better about you and about this relationship. Also, we spoke about smiling before, but show enthusiasm. Do not listen, like you will have these very formal people online telling you, oh, this is exactly how you should present yourself or whatever. I'm in the camp of, if I'm excited about something, as long as I'm appropriate and somewhat professional and well presented, I will share that excitement. Don't jump all over everything they say, but if you're excited about something, share it. If you're looking forward to something, do say that. A tip also for handling curveballs. Sometimes you might get a question that's like, tell me something I can't see about you on your resume, or teach me something in 60 seconds. What I want you to do in those situations is take a deep breath, take a second, and then just give an answer that works, that makes sense, but don't feel like you have to give a crazy answer. They know this is a tricky one. If they're asking it, they're usually trying to get a sense of like how you think, or if you're going to share something creative. Try to take the time to come up with something nice, something that's true to you and how you would approach things, but don't put too much pressure on yourself to do something crazy. Have water nearby. We spoke about this. Be somewhere with great connection. Okay, if it's a phone call, try calling your mom before. Ask her if she hears your audio right. If you're good for the interview. If the recruiter is late to the call, do not email them or hound them with a message or whatever for at least like 5-10 minutes in, okay? Maybe after 10 minutes in, you start to consider maybe sending the hi, does this time still work for you, for our chat, something like that. But in the first 5-10 minutes, don't be the person that does that. And lastly, do a little bit of snooping. Before your call, look up the recruiter on LinkedIn. Maybe there's something in common that if you read the room during the call and the recruiter's pretty chatty, you can bring up. And maybe you do that just to calm your nerves. Those are my tips, but before you leave, I want you to tell me in the comments, are you stressed about something specifically that I didn't bring up that I can help answer? Do you have a story to share? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. I love to hear your feedback. And if you like this, if you think this was useful, a like is free to give, and so is a share. If you know anyone that is recruiting right now, please share this video with them if you think it would be useful. And subscribe if you want more content like this. I create a lot of content around productivity, around creativity, about being ambitious with purpose. If that's the kind of content that resonates with you, please feel free to subscribe, and thank you for watching.